17 seconds. That is how long Eric Swalwell sat completely still after John Kennedy placed the first document on the table, not shifting in his seat, not reaching for his water glass, not looking at his staff. Still, the kind of stillness that happens when a person hears something they believed was buried and realizes, in real time on live television, that it wasn't buried at all. Kennedy had been waiting for this moment for 6 weeks, and Swalwell had no idea it was coming. Here is exactly what happened. The hearing had been running for nearly 2 hours. Other members had taken their turns. The exchanges had been sharp but predictable, the kind of back and forth that fills hearing rooms without changing anything. Swalwell had handled each round the way he always does, confident, quick, a lawyer's instinct for finding the exit before the door closes. He checked his phone once. He leaned back in his chair. He looked, by every measure, like a man who had done this enough times to know how it ends. That was the last moment he looked comfortable. Because John Kennedy had been sitting at the far end of that table for 2 hours with a single folder in front of him, closed, untouched. He hadn't asked one question. He hadn't interrupted once. He had simply sat there, pen moving slowly across his legal pad, waiting for the chairman to call his name. Kennedy is a particular kind of senator. He speaks slowly. He uses plain language. He has a way of making a question sound almost conversational, almost gentle, until it lands and you realize it was never gentle at all. It was precise. It was constructed. And it had been coming for a long time. At 3:14 p.m., the chairman recognized him. Kennedy opened the folder. "Congressman Swalwell," he said, and his voice was easy, almost warm. "I want to talk to you about a complaint, specifically a formal written complaint submitted to the House Ethics Committee on March 7th of this year, signed by 3 individuals, detailing a pattern of conduct that the complaint describes as a serious abuse of position." Swalwell's expression didn't change, but something behind it did, a calculation happening in real time. "Are you aware of that complaint?" 2 seconds of silence. "Senator, I'm not going to respond to unverified allegations in a public setting when the appropriate process." "I didn't ask if you were going to respond to it." Kennedy's voice didn't rise. It just stopped being warm. "I asked if you were aware of it." The room shifted. That particular quality of silence that settles over a hearing room when everyone present understands that something real is about to happen. Swalwell's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly, but the cameras were close enough to catch it. "I am aware that complaints get filed in Washington every day for political purposes." "This one," Kennedy said, "was filed by former members of your own staff." Nobody moved. Kennedy reached into the folder and pulled out a single document. He didn't hold it up. He set it on the desk in front of him, looked at it for a moment, and continued. "This is a copy of the complaint, submitted March 7th, signed by 3 former staffers who worked directly in your office between 2021 and 2024. I want to read you one passage, just one." He looked down at the page. Quote, "The pattern of conduct described herein represents a sustained and deliberate misuse of authority that created a hostile and compromised working environment. Multiple attempts to raise these concerns internally were met with retaliation, reassignment, and in one case, termination." He set the document down. Retaliation, reassignment, termination. Those are serious words, Congressman. Can you tell this committee what those 3 former staffers are referring to? Swalwell reached for his water glass, took a slow sip, set it down carefully. "Senator, I have served in Congress for over a decade. In that time, I have made decisions that not everyone agreed with. Personnel decisions are among the most difficult. I didn't ask about personnel decisions." Kennedy's voice was flat now, precise. "I asked about retaliation. The complaint uses that word specifically, not disagreement, not difficult decisions. Retaliation. Is that characterization accurate?" 4 seconds. "I categorically reject any suggestion that my office has engaged in retaliatory conduct against any current or former staff member." "Then you won't mind," Kennedy said, reaching into the folder again, explaining this. He produced a second document, an internal email. He read from it without looking up. This email is dated September 14, 2023. It was sent from your Chief of Staff to your Deputy Chief of Staff. The subject line reads, Termination Timeline. Confidential. The body of the email references, and I'm quoting directly, the individual who filed the original concern and states, we need this resolved before it reaches anyone outside the office. He set it down. We need this resolved before it reaches anyone outside the office. That email was sent 4 days after one of the 3 complainants raised their initial concern internally. 2 weeks later, that person was terminated. The room was completely still. A Republican member who had been checking his notes slowly set his pen down. 2 journalists in the gallery had stopped typing simultaneously. The stenographer's fingers had gone quiet. Swalwell's senior counsel, seated directly behind him, leaned forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. Swalwell didn't acknowledge it. His eyes stayed fixed somewhere between Kennedy and the document sitting on the table. Congressman, Kennedy said. His voice had dropped slightly, not in volume, in temperature. That email was produced under congressional subpoena. It came from your office's own records, and it connects the termination of a staff member directly to the internal complaint they had just filed. He folded his hands on the desk. That is the definition of retaliation. I want to give you the opportunity to explain it. 11 seconds of silence. Every camera in the room had repositioned. Every journalist had stopped filing. Because 11 seconds of silence from a sitting congressman in response to a question about his own office's internal email is not a pause. It is an answer. And everyone in that room understood exactly what kind of answer it was. Swalwell finally spoke. His voice had lost its earlier confidence. What remained was careful, measured, the voice of someone choosing every word with the awareness that each one was being recorded. Senator, the email you are referencing involves a personnel matter that was handled through appropriate legal and HR channels. The characterization you are applying to it is, it's not accurate. There are legal processes that govern how these matters are reviewed, and the legal process, Kennedy said quietly, is this committee, right now, today. And the document in front of me is your office's own email produced by your office under subpoena connecting a termination to an internal complaint filed 4 days earlier. He paused. I've been doing this a long time, Congressman. I know what appropriate HR channels look like, and I know what it looks like when someone is trying to keep something from reaching anyone outside the office. He picked up both documents, stacked them neatly. I am formally requesting that this committee subpoena the complete personnel files of all 3 complainants, all internal communications related to their terminations or reassignments, and any HR or legal correspondence generated between September and December of 2023. He looked directly at Swalwell. Because 3 people who worked directly for you signed their names to a formal complaint. They describe retaliation. And your office produced an email that appears to confirm exactly what they describe. 1 beat. The complaint doesn't disappear because the hearing ended. The email is already in the congressional record. And John Kennedy made sure every person watching understood exactly what it means. Because here is what 3 former staffers did that most people in Washington never do. They signed their names, not anonymously, not through a lawyer's carefully worded statement. They put their names on a formal document and described what they experienced in precise, specific language. Retaliation, retaliation, termination. Words that carry legal weight, words that don't appear in a formal ethics complaint by accident. And the email Kennedy placed on that table didn't come from an anonymous source, didn't come from a political opponent. It came from Swalwell's own office, produced under subpoena, in his own staff's words, connecting a termination to a complaint filed 4 days earlier. That is not a political attack. That is a paper trail. 10 business days. The clock is running.